When I first saw Peak on the Steam store, I was probably the least excited person on the planet. With the release of Repo in February, I'd pretty much had my fill of this entire genre of game. You know, the 4-player online co-op games where you have to go on some wacky, insane adventure with proximity chat. Has a name, I think, it rhymes with Kids Bop or something. Repo was pretty much the best I felt that genre was going to get in terms of design, and its release started the complete oversaturation of that game in the indie space. Today, it's like we can't go 2 weeks without a brand new game trying to pick up where Lethal Company left off. So when I saw Peak on the store, I rolled my eyes and kept scrolling. Come to find out, it's actually really freaking good. This game was made by Aggro Crab, a game studio based in Seattle, Washington. Given that Starbucks is also from Seattle, I'm really hoping this game studio can prove that something good can come from that place. A while ago I tried their first game, Going Under, and I thought it was alright, but I ended up refunding it because roguelikes aren't really my thing. But I did love their attempt to mimic the corporate infographic art style in a 3D space, since the game takes place in an office. It was pretty cool. I haven't played Another Crab's Treasure, their other game, but that also seems to be pretty well liked.
As a cuddly crustacean with a license to krill, Another Crab's Treasure has you...
But while Aggro Crab's other games are mostly action-adventure titles, Peak is a survival platformer, a genre mashup you don't really see all that often. I think it's because survival games are often about the player feeling helpless or feeble in comparison to the wilderness around them, and having strong, expressive movement kind of contrasts that experience in a weird way. Like imagine The Forest, but you play as Mario, and you can long jump everywhere and yell, "Wahoo!" It'd kinda take away from the horror a bit, I imagine. The nature of a survival platformer is that you have to find a way to balance the added movement options of a platformer with the stress that comes with constantly managing resources in a survival game. This video is meant to go over how Peak does this so well, explaining how this game has managed to stand out over a bunch of other games in such an oversaturated genre. I'm going to talk about the good, the bad, and everything in between. So get ready, and let's see how good Peak really is. When you first join a lobby, you spawn in an elevator and get a passport. This passport is the game's way of contextualizing character creation, you know, since it has what you look like on it. I really like this. It's a really clever way to merge a necessary game mechanic with the world we're in, which really helps with immersion. This is honestly one of Peak's biggest strengths as a game, being able to take game mechanics and make them tangible objects in the game world, and it's something we'll see more and more as we continue this review. The character designs themselves are really charming. They remind me of cereal mascots or Saturday morning cartoon characters, with the simple faces and basic geometry used for the bodies. They're also very colorful without looking neon. I absolutely hate when games just throw some neon green or purple stuff on screen without any care given to how it affects the color palette or aesthetic of the game. The newer Call of Duty games do this a lot, and it just sucks. So I'm really glad Peak doesn't give into the hype with its customization system. Also, I haven't really brought up the name itself yet, but it's obviously marketing genius. You might as well have just called the game good. Could you imagine if someone did the opposite of this? Like imagine playing a power wash simulator style game where you pick up trash off the street, and someone's like, "What game are you playing?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, I'm playing garbage." There's also a lot of small touches made to the characters to make them easy to latch onto and appreciate. A lot of their emotes are clearly animated to be stiff and spastic as an artistic choice, which I think adds to the cartoon feel I mentioned earlier, and each character's eyes also follow you around when you're in front of them. These touches really help with making the characters in the game come across more alive and dynamic in the world, and contribute significantly with making proximity chat interactions feel natural. The mouths also open and close depending on the proximity chat volume like they do in Repo, which is also a great touch. Having your characters visibly respond to the smallest actions of the player is one of the best ways to hook people into a multiplayer game. It honestly makes me wish they did it more, like having the head turn slightly with the eyes when the characters look around, or just giving the characters a more charming idle animation. Right now they just stand there and stare longingly into the void. You could tell they put a lot of time into this part of the game, but I think it could be taken just a tad farther. Maybe they didn't want to make it look uncanny though. A lot of games can go kinda overboard with this sort of thing.
In a word, what does this say to you?
Say to you. Yes, good question.
No.
Alright, so I've made my character. The resemblance is uncanny. I'm ready to enter the airport? Yeah, like with the passport, the usual lobby or menu to get into a game is replaced with a playable airport hub with a bunch of minigames to interact with. Obviously, this is just another great way to contextualize the journey of Peak, and shows how much time and care was put into polishing this game and its world. But this area also acts as a nifty tutorial for many of the game's mechanics. At the far end, there's a photo booth, a chessboard, and a basketball court. Haha, Kobe! The most important part of this area, aside from the way you get out of it, is the rock wall in the corner, which is very good at helping new players learn how climbing and ropes work, which I find really funny. Like, imagine you went to the airport and you did this rock wall climbing attraction at the airport, and then the airplane ends up crashing. And now that rock wall experience is the only thing keeping you between life and dying. I hope you mastered that rock wall, buddy, because there is no turning back now. This setup is likely a parody of The Forest, what with the airplane crash and the scavenging of resources for survival. Though The Forest didn't invent this setup, I feel like it's the closest point of comparison in the video game space. I don't think Peak is referencing the 1987 novel Hatchet by Gary Paulson, but I guess I could be wrong. Hilariously, most of the objects in the plane are completely useless. The compass, lantern, and flare are all extremely niche, and they aren't really worth picking up for the journey. I wish that these objects were made more obviously useless, as it's kind of a slap in the face to any player who brings these seemingly useful items with them, only to find that they have to drop them anyways for food or more useful stuff.
I'm gonna pick up a compass. Do you know there's multiple compasses, or what the plural of that would be? Oh, it's Kumpai. That's just exciting.
Red herrings like this can be fine in a game, but I think that they should largely be implemented in such a way to where the player can intuit how useful they are. Like maybe adding broken or beat up to their name would make it more obvious how significant the item is, while still encouraging players to try them out and see what they can do with them. Bing Bong is great though, and should never be removed. Honestly, he should be put in more games. Heck, just put him in everything, who cares? The suitcases are what have the really useful stuff. Usually food, power-ups, or placeable items. I'm not going to go over every single item in the game because there's a lot of them, and I actually respect the finite amount of time you have on this earth, but I'll mention the cooler ones that I really like as we go on. One of the best items in the game is the baton, which allows you to set a climbing checkpoint to hang on to without losing stamina. This is invaluable in a lot of situations, as you can essentially use it to double the length that you can climb. It might be a bit too good though. There are pitons built into a later level that have a special behavior where they break if you hang on to them for too long, and I feel like that behavior should be given to the piton by default. Currently you can just hang on to them for as long as you want, and I feel like that's a bit overpowered. It allows you to bypass a lot of the pre-made obstacles in this game. I don't mind it too much though, since this game can already be incredibly unforgiving and difficult as is, but I still wanted to get it out of the way before we continue. Oh, I almost forgot to mention that there's a readable guidebook on the shore for a more tangible tutorial on the game's mechanics. This is a nice gesture, but I kind of wish this guidebook was available in the lobby. Players are naturally going to be feeling a sense of urgency when they're on the shore, so putting an object here that you have to actively read and therefore spend time on seems like an odd choice. Every run also starts with a backpack, which adds 4 more inventory slots to the person wearing it, with the only downside being that they can't carry a partner to safety. The backpack is an essential part of every run, and works really well since it naturally gives more importance to the person wearing it. You don't want to give the backpack to a person that will fall and die, because then you lose all of those items. This means that the backpack should logically be given to the person who's least likely to die, the best player out of the group. All of this equates to the backpack being a way that the game encourages each team to establish a sort of hierarchy, where the backpack holder is the leader or the anchor of the group. This doesn't really apply to me, of course, because I'm going it alone. This natural establishment of team rules immediately helps bring a group together, which I think is really sick. The foundation that Peak sets the moment you crash the plane is really strong, and lends itself to the fun multiplayer hijinks that this genre is known for really well. But regardless, none of that really matters right now, because for my Peak run, I'm completely alone. Playing a multiplayer game by yourself can be an incredibly lonely feeling, and I think that this is something Peak is aware of. There's a completely different feel in this game from when you're around your friends and having a great time yapping it up in proximity chat, to being completely by yourself, with absolutely no help around you. The atmosphere of Peak really takes off in a solo run, and you can hear every single piece of the wilderness around you, which can be both very relaxing and very frightening, especially in later areas. The ambience of Peak is one of my favorite things about it, and it's something that goes widely underappreciated because everyone is playing the game like this.
My God! Don't jump! Don't jump! Oh my God! Okay, that was Peak. Literally.
That was all from the first minute of a Slimesicle video. Jeez, dude. I feel like these clips illustrate how most people view games like Peak, and therefore Peak itself. And while that's fine, I think it does undersell these games when a lot of effort and artistry is actually put into them. There's nothing wrong with enjoying the game this way, but I think Peak and games like it have been pigeonholed into being stream games, or games that can only be played with other people. And for Peak at least, that is not true. It is an excellently designed game, both as a single-player experience and a multiplayer one. So let's really get into the weeds and talk about why that is. Every Peak run starts at the shore. This is the World 1-1 of Peak. If you can't get past here, you're not getting anywhere. Usually maps start with a handful of short hills leading up to the real mountain. These structures allow players to get comfortable with the controls and climbing without getting easily overwhelmed. I really like that because a game like this is going to be naturally a bit daunting at first, so easing the player into the big challenge with a handful of small challenges is a great way to overcome that design problem. It also allows players to get more resources at the expense of time, as a few of these hills tend to have suitcases on top of them. In this clip I get the Rescue Claw, which is a really good starting item. Maybe one of the best in the game considering how relatively common it is. When used well, it can allow players to skip massive portions of the climb upward, and it has 3 whole uses to allow you to do this. This may seem a little bit overtuned at first, since it gives you a huge advantage compared to other items which aren't nearly as useful, but it doesn't have the control or versatility that a lot of other items have, making it only really useful in very specific situations, but when it is useful, it's really, really good. Don't get too carried away though, or you'll end up giving yourself permanent brain damage.
Could be time for your rescue beam. It's never time for the rescue beam. This thing fucking sucks.
Something the developers clearly put a lot of time into is masking the randomly generated terrain in order to make it look good. These environments have the risk of looking off-putting and weird due to the nature of randomly generated terrain. In basically every game, this kind of terrain is generated with a noise map, which helps randomly define the highs and lows of the terrain. In a lot of games, this randomization can look really uncanny and weird, because it's not dressed up to look like naturally forming terrain. But Peak compensates well for this by having foliage and details in just the right places, and tuning the lighting and shadows to look really pretty. Ah man, the fog is rising. You can tell by the text on screen and also how purple the ground is starting to get. You know, who decided that purple was the bad color? Like in ancient times, purple represented elegance or nobility. You know, because only rich people could have it. But now thanks to Pokemon, purple just means poison and evil and bad things. I want a game where the bad stuff is like orange or yellow. Those colors have it too good. Always being associated with smiley faces and orange juice. Anyways, the fog is Peak's long-term time limit. It's essentially a countdown to your death, a constant threat that can't be stopped or slowed. You just have to keep moving to avoid it and you'll be fine, but it can really sneak up on you if you take too long. Peak also has a short-term time limit in the form of the hunger system. Being more hungry impedes your stamina, meaning it limits the distance you can climb without falling. Obviously, if you can't climb, you're not getting anywhere, so keeping yourself from being hungry is a constant stressor while getting up the mountain. That isn't the only thing that can inhibit your stamina though. Pretty much any bad thing that happens to the player has a negative effect on their stamina. This often leads to situations where the player is met with like 4 or 5 negative status effects that all do pretty much the same thing, and there's just nothing for it. I do like the stamina system overall. Having obstacles in the world all negatively affect the player's most important ability is a really clever concept, and encourages a balance between cautiousness and speed. But I do think it would be improved if things like poison or drowsiness gave you a different side effect that made climbing more difficult, like making the player slower or causing them to stop and throw up periodically. I don't know, just something other than making my stamina bar look like a multi-flavored push pop. Currently, the sheer amount of status effects can blend together and become really overwhelming visually for the player, to the point where lots of people will just want to give up when their stamina bar turns from green to a rainbow. This first area doesn't feature many status effects right now though, which is good for me. I can make it to the next area with no problem. When you get to the top of a section, you get a bunch of new items and a campfire to help you cook food, as well as a statue that revives party members in multiplayer games and gives you a very rare item in solo games. After eating our food, we are ready to take on the next area. The second level of peak can be one of two biomes, the tropics or the roots, depending on the day you're playing. These two biomes cover a lot of the same ground, being dense, lush forests with poisonous plants and weather to avoid. That said, this review will focus primarily on the roots, as it was the biome I had the most access to during my playtime, and also is the more interesting of the two to talk about, frankly. It's also the biome I played through during the solo run you're seeing footage of on screen. I have played and beaten both the roots and the tropics though, so I will do comparisons between the two throughout. The roots is certainly an upgrade in terms of aesthetics. You know, it's got that big mushroom trees cottagecore kind of vibe. You know cottagecore? It's the wonderful aesthetic where we romanticize a simple life in the woods and try to ignore all the disease and famine outside. I hope you can enjoy all the books you're reading while your child dies of typhoid fever and the measles. This level can go die in a hole. Aside from maybe the very last level in the game, this is the hardest that Peak gets. And it's the second level. I don't have any issue with ramping up the difficulty a bit, but the Roots easily has the most unique obstacles to overcome out of any of the biomes. It makes for a massive difficulty spike from the first area, causing for a roadblock that makes the rest of the game feel like a breeze by comparison. Let's really look at this level for a bit. Like, really look at it. Here's a list of everything in the Roots that the Peak Wiki considers a hazard. And here's a list of every single hazard in the Alpine, the very next area, for you to compare. I think there's a little bit something wrong with this picture. And it's not just the quantity of obstacles that's important here, it's the actual difficulty of avoiding each of these obstacles and how they synchronize with one another. We're going to get into it in a minute, but most of the Alpine's obstacles are completely avoidable by just moving away from them, whereas the majority of the obstacles in the Roots actively try and hunt you down. I think it's incredibly telling that the most common strategy I see for surviving the Roots is to completely ignore the mountain altogether, using the treetops as elevators to gain as much height as possible without ever touching the wall. When the best way to overcome a challenge is to find a loophole that completely ignores it, it's probably not a very good challenge. It probably means that the obstacles aren't very well designed. And let's go over some of those obstacles while we're here. There's spiders that can trap you in webs and drag you off the map, beetles that can throw you off the level, insane wind that'll blow you off the map and kill you if you aren't prepared, and the worst of all, the peak zombies. These things genuinely freak me out. Like, they move weird and sometimes they fall over and play dead to trick you, and they come out of nowhere, and I just hate these guys. I'm not saying the challenge isn't welcome, I just wish that the ramp up was less significant. You go from an incredibly easy tutorial level to maybe the hardest level in the game, one after another, and it just feels unfair. Not to mention that the bulk of these obstacles are things that'll either be very difficult to see coming, or nigh impossible to notice at first glance. The peak zombies especially just jump out at you from nowhere, and taking a massive amount of damage or dying because of it never feels satisfying. It doesn't feel like the game outwitted me, or that I could have avoided the zombie if I was more skilled. It almost always feels like there's literally nothing I could do.
Hey, guárdame el viento, Tiene que vuelvas, pero guárdame el viento, boludo. No entiendo cómo no te hiciste nada.
A volar.
No.
That said, these zombies do encourage you to be more aware of your surroundings, and I will say, I am constantly on a swivel every time I walk into the forest because of these things, but as a player, feeling like you were killed unfairly is one of the worst feelings in games, and one that you want to avoid whenever possible if you're designing a game. Just having the enemy is fine, and I think the design is actually maybe the coolest of any obstacle in the game. Just don't have them activate from areas outside of the player's vision or altitude level. Having it where they can ambush the player from nowhere just feels a tad too unfair in their current state. The general problem is that there's just way too much going on in the Roots. I agree that the Tropics was a lot more bland by comparison in terms of the obstacles, but it also felt closer to a reasonable step up in difficulty compared to the shore. Sure, there are technically more things in the Tropics to avoid, at least according to the wiki, but most of these things are completely stationary and don't actively try to follow you or hunt you down. This makes it feel like a much more fair challenge by comparison to the Roots. Maybe they could improve the routes by cutting out a few of the obstacles, like the wind or the poison air, or by giving you something that helps you climb to compensate, like the batons in the alpine. Just a little bit of tweaking is all that's necessary to make it feel less like the massive difficulty spike it is now. I know that Peak isn't supposed to be the most fair game, and it certainly isn't supposed to be easy, but I do think the routes is an inconsistent step up in difficulty compared to the rest of the game. But let's see how the third area stacks up in comparison. Like with the previous section, Area 3 can be one of two biomes, though unlike last time, these biomes are polar opposites from one another, the Mesa and the Alpine. The main run that this review is based on only covers the Alpine, so that will be the bulk of what I talk about in this section. That said, I will say that the Mesa is incredibly fun, but suffers from being a bit too easy compared to the other levels of the game. The sun mechanic is easily my favorite part though, and I love how the day-night cycle interacts with the gameplay more here than in any other area. Now with that aside, I want to talk about the Alpine, easily my favorite area in all of Peak. Peak is at its best when it feels less like a survival game and more like a puzzle. For me, pathfinding my way through an area using only the tools and items at my disposal as efficiently as possible is the part of Peak I adore the most, and the Alpine emphasizes that aspect of the game very well. For starters, every obstacle is contingent around one status effect, being frozen. So rather than the routes, where you have to manage as many as 3 status effects at once depending on how bad things get, the Alpine instead has every obstacle contribute to how quickly you're being frozen. The wind, rather than physically blowing you and moving you around, instead makes you freeze, forcing you to find cover so you don't freeze to death. This adds an extra stop whenever you're pathfinding your way through the stage, adding a lot of variety to the ways in which you scale the mountain and rewarding the player for being tenacious. In the shore, the pathfinding was fairly straightforward, and there was rarely a reason to divert from the fastest available route. In the routes, there are constant distractions forcing you to break from your route all the time, making it difficult to feel that joy of constant progress. But here, there's a nice balance between overcoming obstacles and making a steady trek up the mountain. As you get further up the mountain, these blue rocks impede your progress. Touching them makes you freeze, so you want to avoid them as much as possible, but the catch is that they're often necessary to touch in order to climb up and make progress. So you have to make sure that you use them to ascend, but are touching them for the lowest amount of time possible. This is the kind of game design I absolutely die for. The ice rocks present a very simple challenge to the player. They give you an obvious solution, but that solution will cost the player stamina. So the question is, can the player get through this puzzle without using the obvious solution? Sometimes the answer to that question is no, but every run requires the player to figure that out on their own. It's these kinds of game design situations that make the player think, and make the gameplay of Peak so interesting. All of this combines to make a challenge that's not super easy, but also not agonizingly difficult. My only real criticism of the Alpine is that a lot of its obstacles don't encumber the player nearly as much as they probably should. They end up feeling a lot like filler, like the geysers and the icicles. You will almost never encounter these at all, and when you do, they definitely won't prevent you from climbing, because all you have to do is walk around them. Oh look, I found a cannon. You know, a lot of the stuff in these suitcases makes sense for people to have when traveling. You know, like airline food and trail mix. Like batons are a bit of a stretch, but at least you can fit that in a suitcase, and who knows, maybe a hiker was traveling in the plane that crashed with us on it. But a cannon? Who was packing this? How did they fit it in here? And a, like, racing flag? Is there like a NASCAR enthusiast on the plane? Despite this completely shattering my immersion and sense of realism, I guess it doesn't matter. Both of these items are great. The cannon is a massive risk versus reward item. In the right hands, it can allow you to shoot up great distances, but it can just as easily force you to take damage and get nothing for it. This item probably has a very high skill ceiling, even if I can't really get the hang of it. What you just witnessed was the only time I've ever gotten hit by a geyser in my 25 hours playing this game, and it was just because I wanted to see what would happen. It's a complete joke. The checkpoint flag is also a cool item. It allows you to set your spawn points so you get a single spare chance if you die during a section. If you get this early on, I highly recommend using it for the routes, because that is the hardest section in the game, and you will need it. Oh yeah, I almost forgot to mention the atmosphere of the Alpine. I'm admittedly a sucker for anything snow or ice related. It's almost always a cozy time, and here is no different. The sound design is very good at making you feel as isolated as possible. It's the perfect bow on what was already the best area in the game. Let's just hope that the next 2 areas can carry that momentum. So, fun fact, the run that's on screen right now is the furthest I'd ever gotten in Peak. Before this moment, I had never been able to beat the Alpine, and I hadn't seen any footage of what lied beyond it. So when I saw the caldera, I was immediately scared out of my mind. The insane amount of contrast between the calm, frozen wilderness and this fiery hellscape is just perfect at putting the player on their back foot. It really helps it to set in that you're nearing the end of the game. Actually, when I got here, I thought this was the last area of the game, and I was eager to see the end of it. That said, the caldera is more of an appetizer than the main course. This series of pillars, chains, and pits of lava is fairly short, and acts more as a precursor of things to come than an entire fully fledged area. That doesn't make it bad though, and it certainly doesn't make it easy. This is the area that takes the most advantage of Peak as a platformer, with most routes through the caldera requiring big jumps over insta-kill lava. Figuring out a route through this place is easier, since it's more open and visible than any area before, but actually executing that route is what's fun about the caldera. Like with the Alpine, this area is about avoiding one specific status effect, but instead of being frozen, this time you're avoiding being burned. However, honestly, these are basically the same effect, just coming from different sources. Replacing the ice rocks from the tundra are these chains, which are often low enough to the lava to cause the player to burn. This, combined with the cyclical rising and falling of the lava, means that the player has to make fast decisions in order to make it across the fiery rocks and chains quickly while the lava is low, before it has a chance to rise again. This is probably the area of the game that'll be cleared the fastest by the player, simply because of how much the area encourages the player to move quickly. That said, it's also definitely the shortest area of the game, and reaching the end of it is fairly straightforward. The end is marked by this temple with a bunch of pillars and stone structures around it. Peak doesn't have much lore, aside from these scrolls that are randomly placed at each campfire, but I do love the idea of there being an old civilization buried somewhere in this volcano, long since deceased. Having structures like this in your game is a great way to get the player speculating without having to naturally flesh out a game's world. Honestly, some games put too much emphasis on their world building and it kind of pisses me off. Like, I love Paper Mario, but if every time I hovered over the Power Smash badge it gave me its entire life story in the UI, it'd definitely go from my 6th favorite game of all time to my 7th. Entering this tunnel immediately preps the player for how massive this volcano is, and gradually builds the player up for the final challenge the game has for them: the kiln. I really like the name of this place. A kiln in real life is the name for a machine that fires pottery. It uses heat to turn clay into something solid and beautiful, and this level is no different. It's difficult, but not in an unfair way. It's putting one last fire under you to see if you're really good enough to make it out of here alive. It's a climb that goes straight up. No inclines, not a huge amount of obstacles aside from these fire rocks, and of course, the rising lava. Yeah, the fog has become something of an afterthought in this review, huh? And I think the devs knew that it's not really a threat for experienced players. So instead, the devs moved up the stress by replacing it with yet another obstacle to encourage the player to move quickly, one that moves much faster than the fog did. The best strategy I found to beat the kiln was to take things carefully. The lava does rise quickly, but as long as you don't overthink your pathway, you should be fine. Use any chain launchers, batons, ropes, and energy drinks you have to find the best way up. And eventually, after brute forcing enough routes, you'll make it out. That said, when I first got to this part, I wasn't ready for it. Yeah, so dying in this game sucks. Like, it's not badly designed, more that it just feels awful. You get a notice that your body won't be found and a graph showing just how close you were to the end. It's honestly a super cool way to visualize your progress, but it's also just really depressing to look at. I've seen Steam reviews complain that this is a bad thing, and that you should be able to save your game or retry from an earlier point. I think that those people might be missing the point of Peak just a little bit. Not to get too flowery and overly artsy, like I know this is just a video game, but Peak is the kind of game that's absolutely about the journey and not the destination. Sure, getting to the top of the mountain is the ultimate goal, but the fun of Peak is how that goal is reached, not reaching the goal itself. At least for me. It's not like there's a super insane reward waiting for you when you beat the mountain, or that you get to see the ending to some grand story. It's not a multi-hour long story-based adventure with twists and turns. It's a simple challenge, and the variety of the ways in which that challenge can be completed is what makes the game beautiful. In a lot of ways, Peak is something of a sandbox game as much as it is a survival game, or a platformer. Sure, there's an end goal, but the ways in which you reach that end goal will vary wildly between players. This is further emphasized by the map itself, which changes every single day to give players a dynamic challenge. Peak is the perfect amount of challenge necessary to keep a player engaged while still maintaining its difficulty, and that is why people love it so much. After I died here, I didn't feel demoralized or frustrated. I was satisfied with my performance. Sure, it sucked that I was this close to finishing the game, but I knew that I could just try again another day and see how I do. And so, I did. When I finally made it out, I was greeted with the last area of the game, the peak. Oh my gosh, I did it, yay! There's no obstacles, no enemies, nothing to fear. It's just a small victory lap to commemorate that you finally beat the game. As I mentioned earlier, the majority of the gameplay has been completely by myself, which may strike you as odd. This game is known for its multiplayer. It's easily the aspect of the game people praise the most. So why would I play Peak without its most acclaimed feature? Well, because as I alluded to earlier, Peak has been written off by many people as a game that's only fun because of its multiplayer, and I think that's selling the game really, really short. The word of the day is Friendslop. This has been a designation given to co-op games that focus on interactions with friends and accomplishing a key objective as a team. While that description would be fine on its own, the term Friendslop often has a negative connotation, implying that the game wouldn't be fun by itself. It needs the multiplayer to have any value. While this may be true for a very select few games, it's not true at all for the majority of the games I've seen attached with this label. It's not true for Lethal Company, Deep Rock Galactic, Repo, and it's certainly not true for Peak. Like, yeah, this game is designed with multiplayer in mind. There's mechanics like the revival statue and being able to help other players up ledges that make the game much, much easier when you have a party to play with. Not to mention the game directly encourages a no player left behind mentality through both the helping up mechanic and a direct mention in the guidebook. But just because the game was designed around multiplayer doesn't mean it isn't an excellent single-player experience as well. The game's art style and attention to detail are top-notch. Learning how to avoid each obstacle in the different biomes is incredibly fun and satisfying, and aside from some hiccups in the routes, the game never feels unfair or insurmountable. Combine that with a really satisfying reward system in the form of badges and cosmetics, as well as replayability with a new map every day and cyclical biomes, and you have a game that's really good regardless of whether or not you're playing with people. It's similar to Mario Kart in that way, a game designed around multiplayer that's also insanely good by yourself. Peak is an excellently designed game. Its clear aggro crab put a ton of time and effort into every single detail, and they are still, months later, updating the game regularly with balance changes and new additions. Whether you're in a group or attempting the summit completely alone, Peak is guaranteed to give you a solid experience. It's an excellent game, and without a doubt, much more than just Friendslop. Thank you for watching.